We are living in a time of emergence. Some might think of it as a time of chaos. Some might think it is a time of struggle between good and evil. Some might have other ideas. Regardless, we're living in a time of great change. We have seen a change in the everyday lived experience of people. 18% of the people in the Western world are rooted in agriculture. 82% of the people are now anchored in cities. 50% of all people no longer live in traditional domestic relationships. The primary religious expressions that have served us in the past are being pushed aside. They don't die out, but they nevertheless lose primacy. A period of genuine angst is ushered in as we search for the answer to three dominant questions that must be answered for a new age and a new experience. These are the three questions. Where is the authority? The second question, what does it mean to be a human being? Or another way of putting it is, what is consciousness? And the third is, how can we live together? Now, historians have attempted to provide a date when some of these questions can be rooted. And the date that they routinely assign to our present experience is 1842. In this perspective, it's been about the last 150 years, from 1842 to 1992, that we've been trying as a society and as a culture and as a religious people to chip away ideas, institutions, experiences, interpretations of life that seem no longer to work. Since 1992, and historians assume for the next 85 years or so, we will be living in a period of trying to figure out what is left after all the chipping away. What needs to be restored? What needs to be refounded? What yet needs to be discovered? And finally, from this perspective, around the year 2100, we will enter into a period of stability for a couple of hundred years before the process starts again. This is the working theory, generally referenced as the time of emergence or the time of emerging truth. Now, I believe that we are lucky and blessed to live in this period of time. The period of time when it gets figured out again, or at least until the next time. At this juncture, for us as religious people, we need to throw into the mix something that is entirely new in this reoccurring experience of change and paradigm shifts that has been part of the experience of the human person from the very beginning. I think this something new is profoundly important to understand and then to claim as a necessary part of the reality of what we are experiencing. I believe this something new is that for the first time in the history of humanity, the pattern of development that is at work and the unfolding of the experience is something that we are aware of and have identified. In other words, we're not in the dark. We're very much in the fullness of the light, and hopefully, this awareness of the change that we're experiencing will make a difference for us individually and for the human family as a whole. Obviously, with this awareness, there's also a great responsibility that goes along with it. The responsibility includes the fact that we cannot deny the process. We cannot ignore the reality. We cannot dig in our heels or put our heads in the sand. We're invited to embrace the change and have the courage to fully enter into the process. We're invited to acknowledge that there are some components that we fully understand, and that there are still others that are completely unknown to us. And we must be patient and let it unfold as it's meant to unfold. Some of the realities of this perspective, of this dynamic, in no particular order, is important for us to understand, because these are the questions that must be answered in our time and place. I don't have an exhaustive list of questions, but some of the questions that seem to be very much important to be answered at this time in our life would include these. 1. How much authority does the individual human person possess? What part of the experience of being human necessitates some sort of dialogue, or consensus, or permission, or even obedience to another person? Or is it simply enough to be true to yourself, accept the consequences, and that's about it? A second question, which makes many people very uncomfortable to ask, is this: what does a post-Christian society look like? What, if anything, replaces the Christian ethic? Can we even assert that there is a single Christian ethic? Or if such a Christian ethic exists in whole or in part, is it relevant? Is it important? A third question, and this is where many of us struggle with it in family and communities and neighborhoods and in nations, is what does human sexuality mean? What role does gender play in human relationships? Is human sexuality procreational? Is it relational? Is it recreational? Or some integration of all three and still others? And a fourth question that I think probably will be answered mostly by theologians, but which is extremely important to us, is a specific theological question. And it brings us face to face with the doctrine that's known as atonement, or substitutional death. We routinely proclaim that Jesus came to die for our sins. But this asks a question: how can an omnipotent God be so powerless as to have to demand the death of his Son to die for our sins? It was comforting in times past, but perhaps not so comforting today. These, as I acknowledge, are some of the big questions. These are the kind of questions that theologians and people of faith must wrestle with. These are, in fact, the kind of questions that are worth asking. It seems to be that most of the other questions, the kind that grabs all the headlines, are simply a distraction, perhaps even a waste of time. Personally, I do not fear the questions or the struggle to identify the truth that emerges from the questioning. If I have any frustration, it is the frustration of encountering so many good men and women who should be using their talents and their abilities to engage in the essential and important questions that we must answer, who seemingly abandon the search and settle for the reality that distracts and confuses. I'm also concerned about the people who are caught up in the struggle and who seem to be discarded as collateral damage in the process. They're seen as the unfortunate consequence of living in a time of great change. I find this viewpoint unacceptable, unsettling, and discouraging. I believe it's important to engage, to ask, to struggle, to be uncomfortable, to do the hard and necessary work of becoming a fully engaged human being. This is both our challenge and our invitation, or so it seems to me.